So I'm just going to launch into it. Anyway, I want to thank Mala for putting this all together. Thank you, Mala, once again for our initial run here. So here we are. We're going to talk today about how to make your home less vulnerable to wildfire. The thing is, as we know, we all love living in these great places, but we've got to do something to mitigate the fire risk. And that's what this is about. So just a little bit about us. We were formed as the North Topanga Canyon Fire Safe Council in 2010. Our goal really is to learn from previous wildfires and what other communities have done to bring this knowledge to others. We've been awarded different grants. We've brought in about $365,000 to Topanga to support things like making safer roadways by getting rid of hazardous vegetation. We've done community education, and we have done this thing called the Home Ignition Zone Evaluation, which we're going to talk to you about. It really is specifically what you can do around your house to make it safer. Beth has done a great job getting grants from Edison and training other people on how to become evaluators, how to teach people this knowledge, and that's part of what this is. So I'm going to move on to the next slide here. That's us. So if you can see this is in Malibu. This is a good friend of ours who does these slides. He works for the National Park Service. His name is Robert Taylor. And that's basically fire frequency and mean return interval. And what it means is that every time you see something that's orange or red, that's really a very frequent area for fire. That's Malibu that you're looking at, Malibu Canyon. I don't know, can you see the cursor when I do that? Is that okay? Yeah. Oh, that works like that. That's my pointer. So this is kind of the Malibu Canyon area. You can see that at this point, that is burning some of these areas are burning about every 8, basically about every 11 years or so. I mean, it gets even some of them like every 10 years. So it just shows that these things are not one-off events. The next slide here is this is just the Woolsey fire. This is just the last fire, the big fire we had in Malibu. Woolsey was about 97,000 acres. Really a good portion of the Santa Monica Mountains burned with that fire. And it really jumped the 101 freeway right up here really, really quickly. The takeaway is it made it to the Pacific Ocean in hours. And the takeaway, obviously, is a wind-driven fire cannot be stopped. They can only be directed. The embers jumped the 101, and most of the forward movement of the fire was caused by embers. So we know that at this point, we're pretty clear that we have a problem with wind and embers. So I'm going to go here. So what can we do? As we know, embers are the problem. They're the culprits. LA County Fire estimates that well over half the homes that are lost are due to ember ignition. National experts put the number as high as 90%. So we're going to watch a little piece of video from the Tunnel Fire in Oakland in 1991. And it's got a lot of embers flying around. It's a high wind situation. And it's just, at this point, what you're seeing houses that are fully engaged. At this point, it's not a wildland fire. It's an urban fire because the structures are igniting each other. But you will see something at the end of this that is what we're specifically concerned about. And that's right there. So what you've got there is a nice little tile roof. So probably some litter in the gutter, in the rain gutter. Once that fire gets in there and under that roof, that house can be lost. So it's something as simple as that is what could be the thing that loses the house. And here's another example of that. This is a picture of a house in Lake Tahoe that was lost in a fire up there. And as you can see, I mean, the fire didn't come from the trees. The trees are green and nice. They got singed by the house. The embers came to the house lit on fire, and then the house singed the trees. So what does it show us? This is a lab that they have in South Carolina. It's run by a guy named Stephen Quarles, who's actually going to show up later on in our video today, our presentation. So you know, this proves to you what choices you make around your house has everything to do about whether it survives or not. Let's see if I can show this picture. So that was something that was, what they do is they have a laboratory, they fire embers at this house. They build a house inside of it. And if you can see down there, that there's a little streaks, those are actually, they have ember generators and they just shoot them at the house. So the second photo is after 10 minutes of ember exposure. So it doesn't take much. And once again, if you look at the house, what you've got here is you've got wood siding, you've got some wood chips down here, you've got basically all this fine fuel that would be exactly the kind of things that embers like. Whereas over here, you can see they've got gravel, they've probably got hardy board or something like that for the wood siding. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Beth.
So hi, everybody. The home ignition zone evaluation process that we've created is a formal process, and it was taught to us by the national experts in the field, the very same guys that funded the grant that Ryan mentioned last summer that Edison funded for us, where we actually educated about 140 people by the experts on how to run a program like this. So the home ignition zone is defined as being from the peak of the roof out to just beyond about the first 5 feet from the side of the walls of the house. So this is a different type of definition than what you hear the fire department talking about, but it meshes really closely together with what the fire department is concerned about. So in Topanga, we've done over 200 individual evaluations at people's homes, but today on Zoom, via Zoom, we're going to focus on what you can do right now, today, to make your own home less vulnerable. So in a nutshell, here's our perspective. We look at everything around your home as if it was kindling for a campfire. And then we imagine what would happen when a storm of ember hits. Sort of like 1,000 matches hitting the side of your house, just like a snowstorm of embers. And that really is the image that we use as we walk around the outside of your house. So next slide, please, Ryan.
Hello, hold on. I'm hitting keynote. Okay, there we go.
Okay, perfect. So the evaluation process really starts looking at the chimney and walking down the roof to the eaves. Next slide. So here's a pretty typical house in Topanga. First of all, that picture is of Steve Quarles, the gentleman who has retired now, but he ran that lab in South Carolina. And we videoed him as he went and walked around houses in Topanga before he did a presentation to our community that you can actually find on our website. Here's a wood-sided house, basically, with leaf litter all over the top of the roof. And but this roof, like all the roofs we've seen in Topanga, are Class A, and that means that the roof itself is not going to ignite. It's a fire rating, and in our community, we have not found any wood shingle roofs at all. Everything has been a Class A roof. But the problem is that they're often covered with leaf litter, and so the leaf litter then will ignite. That was fine, Ryan. You could go there. So that leaf litter can be easily ignited by embers, and then that leaf litter is ignited, it can roll up against, in this case, those wood shingles coming out of on the second floor, which can then easily once again be ignited by that simple little fire started by the embers and the leaf litter. But that's a pretty easy thing to fix. All you have to do is keep your leaf litter off your roof. And that's going to be a theme of today's conversation. We're going to be talking about a lot of maintenance items. So Ryan, next slide, please. So here we all, in Topanga, we live under beautiful canopies of trees, and that's probably pretty similar to the environment that you live in too. But trees, once again, drop leaves and needles, which then dry and they end up on the roof and in our gutters. So let's go look at our next slide, Ryan. So here's a house. It's got a Class A roof. They tried to put some gutter guards on, but they haven't maintained them. And once again, those gutters are just full of leaf litter. And this is the number one problem that we find in Topanga, because once that leaf litter ignites, the fire actually can move underneath that Class A roof. And often when you see a burned out house, the roof is actually intact, but the fire is burned underneath it. So Ryan, do you have something you could say about this stuff?
Why, certainly I do, Beth. Raptor gutter guards. This is one manufacturer, but this is something that I've done on my house, and they're stainless steel. They attach to the gutter. They allow water to go through, and they make sure that other stuff doesn't get in there. So that's a good solution. If you're going to do a gutter guard, which I recommend far more than getting up on a ladder all the time and trying to deal with your gutters. That's just one product. We have links to products like this on our website. But they're very simple, and I think I've had that thing up on my roof, I think, for about 6 years now, and it's wonderful. It's just there's just no maintenance involved. So it's a real simple way to mitigate the threat you get from debris in your gutter.
So here's another classic situation that we find in Topanga. We find birds that make their nests just in little spots on houses all the time, or in plants very close to houses. And they're very sweet and they're very cute, but I really can't think of a quicker way to start a campfire than taking a bird's nest and throwing a match on it. So please remember, right now it is still nesting season, and that we really do recommend that you try to hold off removing birds' nests until all the young have left their nests. But of course, if it's red flag day or you've got a fire coming down at you, you might say that bird's nest needs to go.
And Beth, when is nesting season officially over?
So nesting season in Southern California, sort of in our area, generally runs from about the end of February through the end of August. So it's a long time, but you'll know if you've got youngin in the nests right up against your house. You know that when they've fledged and gone.
It gets quiet.
It does. It gets quiet. So next slide, please.
Oh,
Oh, questions. Oh, that's a good idea. So here we've talked a little bit about roofs and gutters. Does anybody have any questions at this point? No hands raised. You can do that by, if you go below down to participants, or someplace on your screen, you can see participants, and then you can raise a hand there.
Have that many people, so if you want to unmute
or you can just unmute yourself and speak up.
Not
hearing you? What about solar panels? We were being asked. So solar panels are themselves not particularly flammable, is our understanding. They don't change the problem, other than the fact that they can collect leaf litter. And so you want to be careful about making sure that you're able to keep the leaf litter from gathering underneath solar panels or against pieces of them. So they make the roof a little bit more complex than it was before.
Right. And then Amala, you mentioned metal gutters. I'm assuming you're saying that it's a better idea to have a metal gutter than to have a plastic or a gutter. Is that right?
And that's certainly true. I think metal gutters are definitely a preferred material than plastic. Plastic tends to, as it gets hot, just sort of melt and sort of drop, actually like napalm, which then can move the fire itself.
Right.
But the most important thing is to keep the gutter clean. If a plastic gutter is clean, it shouldn't really ignite.
Yeah, that would be my answer too. A metal gutter is preferable, but a plastic gutter that has some kind of a cover on it, like the things we were showing earlier, is going to prevent the leaves from getting in there in the first place. So we always like to focus on what's doable, what's not what's perfect.
Yeah, we really believe that a bit of just every little bit you can do will make a big difference. Okay, Ryan, so let's move on to the next section at this point. So we're going to go moving on down from the eaves on down to the foundation of the house. And this is a gable end vent, and most of our houses have vents pretty similar to this one. And code requires 1/4-inch mesh covering for all vents, but that's not going to keep the embers out. That's going to keep the rodents out, but it won't keep the embers out. And actually, attics like this one was the first place that firefighters really noticed that embers were starting fires and literally burning houses from the inside out. So embers were getting inside, lighting something inside in the attic on fire. And often the fire department would have come, inspected that house and gone on saying that house was fine. And then hours later, it would all of a sudden be engulfed in flames. And so this is a real common problem now.
We had that, and Beth, we had that real-time example of that. We went on kind of a post-mortem of the fire they had up in Ventura. And we talked to some homeowners in the neighborhood where most of the homes were lost, but a few of them survived. We remember that one guy who was just up in his attic with a garden hose inside his attic, just squirting this stuff down as it was coming through. You know, once again, he didn't have the proper covering for his attic, so the embers were just flying in there. And, you know, and with the air pressure, it does really strange things. Embers tend to get into places that you wouldn't think the air would flow them into, but attics are definitely a problem.
Absolutely. So let's go to the next slide and take a look at, this is a lower vent. It might be a crawl space vent. And once again, this meets code. It's got 1/4-inch mesh, keeps the rodents out, but it's not going to keep the embers out. And when you look through there, you can just sort of see all this, I call it schmutz, that's just gathered in there. And once again, this is something that Steve Quarles just really emphasized, that it's really critically important to clean up all of the small flammable items, the leftover construction sawdust, and just the things that gather in these spaces in your crawl space and in your attic. So Ryan, is there something we can do about this?
Oh, there certainly is, Beth. As you know, that you take a look at that picture. So that's 1/4-inch mesh. That's just not fine enough to stop embers. So there's a lovely product called Quick Mesh. Now this is the inexpensive way of dealing with it. There are also some proper vents you can replace by a company called Brandguard, which we have, once again, we have links to that and everything. But Quick Mesh is something that's basically comes in rolls in different widths, and you can just roll it on. They've got it at Lowe's, Home Depot, Amazon. You've got to wear gloves when you put it on because it'll tear your hands to shreds. But it's one very simple way. I've done this we have an outside water heater, and it's got a little vent there on the door. It's in a little room outside, and I put this Quick Mesh so we could get the ventilation the water heater needs, but also stop the embers from getting through.
So thank you, Ryan. So here is Steve once again looking at a house in Topanga, and this house had these plants growing right up against the wall. It looked really beautiful, but the problem with them is that they create a lot of leaf litter and they become very dangerous. So you can see how nice and lovely and green they look here, but if you look down, you can see that Steve is pointing out all of the dry leaves that have collected there. Once again, imagining your campfire, you could see how this could easily, the embers could easily start these on fire. And then, why don't we go to the next slide, Steve? And then this actually has a wood trellis holding up that plant that would easily start burning. And then at the top, there's a bird's nest. So we've now got fire that's burning right up against, next to the house. It's exactly what you don't want to have. Underneath the eaves, next to windows that are single glazed windows that will be pretty easy to crack. And so if you have plants growing up against your house like this would be one of the things that we would really, as we walk around and take a look at your house, that we would really would really tell you, you really want to think about letting go. Ryan had roses all over his house and had long conversations with his wife. And now they have one very carefully manicured rose that satisfies her need. And Ryan's comfortable with the fact that it's not, doesn't have a lot of leaf litter underneath it, and he's maintained it, and they get to pick their roses, and it's a compromise.
Yeah.
Um,
We were going to pause for some questions here, and I actually see a couple on the chat. Dot Wong asked, are there companies that you recommend that do home hardening? What would be their business? That, Beth, I don't really think that we're really, well, what do you think? I mean, there certainly are companies that will sell, they're selling sprinkler systems and things like that, but they're not, I haven't seen those companies really take a look at the basic issues that we're talking about, which is the vegetation right up against your house that could be an issue. Is there anybody that you know about?
Yeah, so I haven't found any company. If you can make a list of the types of things in your own house that sort of look like the things we're raising as issues, a lot of it is maintenance. So taking down this vegetation growing up against the house, that's really a gardening issue. The installation of the quick mesh, when I did it on my house, my gardeners did it for me, but a handyman could do it. So we haven't found any single company that's doing home hardening and doing the retrofits yet.
Right.
As Ryan mentioned, we have found companies, obviously, that are selling sprinkler systems, not something that we're going to jump in and recommend that you spend your money on. We have found companies, there are companies that make much higher well-designed vents that you can retrofit your house with, but we believe that quick mesh is adequate. Once again, William Ramsire is asking about vent mesh. Will 1/8 inch vent mesh work? And the answer is really you want to make sure that there's enough substance in the metal that it is 1/8 mesh. So if you wanted to take 2 layers of 1/4 inch hardware mesh and double it up so that they were 1/8 inch openings, yeah, you could use that, but it'd be a lot more work than just going and buying a roll for less than $20 at Lowe's or Amazon.
Well, and for, as to William's question, William, the recommendation is 1/8 inch right now. 1/4 inch was what like we said was
what code is
about getting rid of rodents and things like that. 1/8 inch it still doesn't get rid of every ember, but you do need to have some air that flows in and out of your vent for other reasons. They found that it gets rid of enough embers. There is a website that has, the IHBS website. They have videos, and I think we have a link to them. I'll make sure that we have one on the website. But there's a link where they shoot at that, that house that was in that lab. They shoot embers at that house, and then they put a camera inside the attic, and they do I think they did a version with 1/4 inch mesh, and you can see all this stuff flying in. And then they did a version with 1/8 inch mesh, and it's still a couple things flew in, but they were so small that they didn't ignite. You know what I mean? They were like little tiny matches. So it could be, right now 1/8 inch is what the people are currently recommending to stop most of the embers.
So unless somebody else has a question, anybody? Okay, why don't we continue on then, Ryan? Okay. And move on to the foundation, to that immediate landscape area. And you can go to the next slide, Ryan. So this is what we're finding is to be really the most critical area right now. After you get done with gutters, really this first 5 feet from the edge of your house outward. Because if you imagine the embers hitting this yellow wall, which is wood, and they'll fall down. And then it's what do they land on that becomes really, really important. So here you see you've got a brick walkway. Well, that's not going to burn. The grass a little bit further away, that's as close to dirt as you can get. And but wait a second, what have they put underneath that pop-out window right next to where Steve is standing?
Uh-oh.
So here, well, look at what they've done. They've put down there some wood mulch and some dry leaf litter that's just blown in there. And I can't, that would be so easy to ignite by embers. And so you really, really, really don't want to use wood mulch in the first 5 feet of your house. Actually, Ryan won't use it at all in his property. I do use wood mulch on my property. And we just have to we each have to make some choices here in terms of our own gardens and situations. So you can just, the embers will land on that leaf litter, which will generate enough heat to light the wood chips, or the wood chips on their own will get ignited by the embers. And all of a sudden, that house will be ignited by this very simple little configuration that would have been so easy to handle differently. You know, they could have put more brick underneath there, or they could have put down some stone, some gravel, which would not be ignitable. In Topanga, we have a lot of houses with wood decks, and so we see situations like this all the time. And we just really recommend that you keep your deck clear of stuff that can burn, just of stuff in particular, because stuff collects leaves. And so behind every single one of these pieces of objects that are there is going to be a collection of leaves. And the other thing that we find is that people keep their brooms on their decks. And while it's really convenient, there is nothing that is going to ignite faster than a broom. And so it's perfect for ember ignition. So while you're thinking about what you've stored on your deck, also think about what you stash underneath your decks. So this is probably our second biggest problem area that we see in Topanga: stuff on decks and stuff stashed underneath decks.
Oh, sorry, I got ahead of you.
And so this is a good moment just to talk about red flag and red flag alerts. So on red flag days, when the weather conditions are just so dangerous, you want to make sure that you bring in things like your outdoor cushions, that flammable doormat that William's pointing out in this picture. You definitely don't want to have that out, and maybe you don't ever want to have a doormat like that. On our website, we have actually a metal doormat that isn't very expensive, that works really well. I've had them outside of my house now for many years. Mm-hmm. And you want to bring in on red flag days any other easily flammable items that are around your house. And it just becomes automatic. I found actually that I don't have any cushions outside ever anymore. I just have my furniture covered with furniture covers, and the cushions are in my garage. When I want to sit outside, I bring out my cushions. But if you've got a
for me, I have lovely outdoor furniture. I just take the cushions in. I also have a barbecue that's right up against our house. I take the propane tank and I move it away from the house, safely away from the house. It's just another little thing that I do just to feel good.
And it's just a really good idea to have a checklist of items that you do that is really helpful. That you would do automatically on red flag days, just to be prepared. So let's move on to the next slide. So wood fences, once again, we're starting to move away from the house. Any wood fence that's connected to your home is actually considered part of your home, because it can bring the fire right to your house. So here's this dry wood fence on fire, and it's going to move. Those flames are going to move right up to your house. Indeed, I think that when I was a child, I lived in the area of the Bel Air fire, and I believe that the house I grew up in was saved because a passing fireman knocked down a 3-foot wood fence that tied into the house. When we got there, that fence was totally burned down, but our house was not burned down. Right. So I think that was really an important thing that saved.
That's also what we heard when we did we did a presentation down in Malibu West near Trancas Beach, and we were talking about the guys. That's the little subdivision that's actually a little inland from the beach, we talked with the guys who were stuck behind in the Woolsey fire, who stayed back, and they were putting out fires in fences all the time. That was a big issue for them.
And so they just started pulling fences down.
Right.
If they had a moment, they'd pull them down to create a separation.
And every house that was lost in that fire, those guys said none of it, no flames ever came to that neighborhood. It was just embers catching stuff near the house, and then the house would go up. You know, if they couldn't stop.
Yeah, those guys said that 80% of the houses they saw that burned down were ignited by embers. Didn't see the flames. So
the mitigation. Oh, sorry.
No, not yet. So here we just live close to each other, and in Topanga we live really close to each other often. And so the most important thing is to recognize that this work has to be done house to house, neighbor to neighbor. You've got to work together to make it safer. Because think about it, once one house is on fire, then the wildland fires become an urban fire, and houses burn much hotter, much longer, and create many, many, many more embers than a wildland fire will create. And there's no doubt about it. We all have neighbors who don't get it in every community, and all we can do is do the best we can do and to lead by example. So
actually, Beth, we've got a couple questions that might be a good time to look at.
So I think we covered the doormat, and then Mala is asking that that she's learned that covering items with an ember-resistant tarp, or actually any tarp, can help. We also have heard that, and we understand that. However, you've got to remember that in these wind-driven fires, there is a lot of wind. And so you can't just cover something. You've really got to engage it and tie it down so the embers can't get underneath it, or it doesn't start blowing off or flapping. So, you know, I would call it a weak defense. What do you think, Ryan?
Well, I think so. I think I do have a quote unquote ember resistant tarp on. We have a pile of wood. Now the pile of wood is probably 30 feet from the house, but I still have a tarp over it because that's just because I'm crazy. But I just don't want a big, bonfire out there. And I like Beth said, I think it would be good. It could slow it down, but I certainly wouldn't want to rely on it 100%.
Absolutely. And William, we're going to answer your question in just a moment. So we're going to keep going.
Yeah, that's right. We're going. Okay.
So Ryan, is there anything that we can do to make this this interface and zone any better?
Well, we got
I forgot about overlapping HICs.
Yeah, okay.
I apologize.
And then we'll
So this is a picture probably from a fire department, which really shows how house to house we all provide protection to each other. And so we haven't really spent any time talking about zone 1, zone 2, or zone 3, but typically zone 1 is about 30 feet out. And it might be that 30 feet out, you'll overlap with the property of 30 feet from your house. You might overlap onto your neighboring's property. Certainly at zone 2, which is usually about the first 100 feet, you are overlapping your neighbor's house most typically. And so they have to provide you with clearance, and you have to provide them with clearance. So you really, really this is really an interdependent community of how to harden homes. So, Ryan, you want to talk about how to do this a little bit better?
Yeah. So we'll get to I'll get to the wood fence in a second, William. This is an example of something that I've done at my house. This isn't my house. This is somewhere in the forest. But the idea is, look at how clean that is. They've used pavers to create that first 5 feet of clearance. It's a great idea. I've got pavers that look just like that all the way around the house. You can see there is some kind of vegetation there, but it's, like I said, it's so small that it's not enough to really make it be a problem. That's a really clean way of doing it. As far as the fence is concerned, William, you're 100% right. This is a mitigation strategy, a very ugly mitigation strategy, I might add. But nonetheless, you've got the wood stops here, and then that last little bit that connects to the house is made out of metal or something that's not going to burn. So that's a good way to kind of preserve your wood fence and not have to completely get rid of it, but have that last little bit be something where it can't transmit the fire to the house. And once again, when we did that postmortem up in Ventura, there were houses that you could see that were singed right by that you could see the fire came right along the fence and went straight to the house that way. Yep. Another example, this is a little more over the top, but panelized steel fencing. This is actually something that they're doing in Australia now. They're actually getting fencing that's a little bit more structurally strong, and it actually can reduce radiant heat. So it means that if the house next to you is on fire, the radiant heat from that fire could actually get absorbed by this fence, and your house is less vulnerable.
So before we move on, are there any other questions just sort of in that really critical close zone? We've sort of been focused in that first 5 feet. We've talked a little bit of some stuff that's beyond that, but it's really, really important that you don't have wood fences that tie into your house. That's really, really a critical thing. Any other questions? Okay, so we'll continue on now beyond 5 feet. And here's where we get into the defensible space zones that the fire department will often be talking about. And so this is where we really mesh in with what the fire department is asking each of us to do as we create our defensible space. So the thing that's important to note is that we really focus on from the house, from the peak of the roof of the house out about 5 feet. They really start talking in about the first 30 feet. So what has been found is that it is really, really critical that flames be kept 63 feet from your house. That's what fire science is finding, is that if you can flow the flames of the fire around your house and keep them from 63 feet away, the materials of the house will withstand that radiant heat. This is also why it becomes so important about what your neighbor does, because at 63 feet, they're likely there. And so when we do our home ignition zone evaluations, we really like to work in clusters in a neighborhood, because it's just so much more powerful that way. So Ryan, next slide, please. So this picture's a little bit hard to see, but it gives you an idea about how to treat these different zones, and about the idea that as your landscape is moving away from your house in that first 30 feet or so, you really, really want to have separation between plants, and that's both horizontally, so the fire can't move horizontally from one plant to the next, and also vertically, so it can't climb up into the trees. And then as you move further and further away, it becomes more of a shaded zone where the fire doesn't have as much fuel and it can be slowed down. So we live in this, as is typical, it's very hard to find chaparral photographs, but we all live in a chaparral ecosystem, not in a pine forest ecosystem. And indeed, you can create islands of chaparral. You don't have to moonscape. We don't at all recommend moonscaping, indeed, to taking we want plants, but we want them to be separated and have islands of materials so that they're not so the fire can't move from one plant island to the next. So Ryan, did I get that explained fairly well?
Yeah, I think you did. I mean, that's the thing that we're always looking at, though, and people will ask, well, is this plant good, or is this a fire-resistant plant, or that plant? And we have our good friend Marty Witter of the National Park Service. She says everything burns. So obviously, there's some that are really terrible, like a Italian cypress, or those pampas grass,
a fountain of pampas grass, or any kind of
or palm tree. Those are pretty bad. everyone knows those are bad. But generally, what we recommend and what we found from everything we've learned, it has to do with the spacing of the plants. You just want to break that chain of continuity, either on the horizontal, like Beth said, or on the vertical. If you got something here, and you got a tree right there, that's no good. This has to go down, or that has to go up. You need to keep spacing around things.
And so, I don't, does anybody have any questions about landscaping right now and about those zones? You good? Okay, so Ryan, why don't we take a look at what some of the stuff was, what we learned.
Okay, so this is an interesting thing. This is the Woolsey fire. There was a website that was up for a while that showed really clearly the damage from the fire. I think we can't find it anymore. They took it down. But I want you to pay attention to this. This is a kind of an interesting thing. It brings back the everything, the real world example of everything we're talking about. So what you're looking at here is a neighborhood it's called Malibu Park. It's just north of Zuma Beach, across the highway, goes up into the hills. This is kind of the flat bit of it, but it's still pretty far away from all the chaparral. It's a neighborhood. So what you're looking at here in this picture are 7 houses. There's this one here. There's that one there. That's 2. There's that one, 3. This one over here, 4. This one down here, 5. This one here, 6. This one here, 7. Now, I want you to guess, based on everything we said, which ones do you think were lost? Because some of these homes were in fact lost. I mean, do you think maybe if you had to pick a home, would it be this house here or that house there? Let's find out. Oops. So, this house, lost. That house, lost. And if you go back and look at it again, look at the veg around that house. Now, the interesting thing about that I see is they were able to save this one, because it just probably, because it had that one thing there, they were able to save that one. This one was completely covered. This one was probably easy to save. Once again, before and after. This is a pretty disturbing photo. This is the campfire up in Northern California,
otherwise known as Paradise.
As you can see, and if I'm not, yeah, you can tell these houses survived. I think this might be a mobile home, kind of a community. I'm not sure, but look at the forest. Forest is green. What happened was the embers flew right through these trees, landed on these places, and then there was home-to-home ignition. So yeah,
hey Ryan, let's stop for 1 second, because
sure.
Andrea has a question here about her house having massive pines and live oaks over it that shade it and keep it really cool. She doesn't need to use any AC. Yeah. What does she do? And we don't believe that all vegetation is bad, and that you have to take everything down. Indeed, as you saw in those pictures in Malibu Park, there were a lot of houses there that survived that had trees very close and around them. So what we would suggest that you really focus on is making sure your house doesn't have leaf litter on it. Both oaks and pines drop a lot of leaf litter, and you really want to make sure that that litter is removed, and that your house is kept, the roof is kept clean, your gutters are clean, and that the ground right up adjacent to your house is kept quite manicured. Right now, one of the things that that we've seen is that, for instance, a house that's right up against a golf course that has basically no vegetation around it can be ignited, and people are always surprised. While another house that's got a lot of big trees around it doesn't ignite. And indeed, sometimes these trees are literally ember catchers themselves. And so it's hard to talk abstractly, but all trees are not necessarily bad. A tree is not at all necessarily bad. And we wouldn't just unilaterally say, oh, you got to take that tree down. Indeed, basically the only trees that we look at that we've taken down are trees which would be impeding evacuation. That's what our grants have paid for the removal of. We've on a very rare occasion have we talked to somebody about maybe the fact that they want to remove a tree adjacent to their house. But generally, we agree with you that shade and that eco environment is very, very important.
Yeah.
So it's up to you to maintain it safely.
It's just, once again, if you've got pine trees, they're going to drop needles. The needles are what's the problem. Just think about that campfire thing we were talking about. If you're going to start a campfire, you usually start with a bunch of nice dry pine needles, and that gets the party started. Well, that's the same thing at your house. You're not going to you're not going to saw off a huge, a 4-inch pine branch and throw it on and have it and expect that's going to be the thing that starts it. So you've just got to be really careful about how those trees drop litter onto your house and how that affects that first 5 feet of your house. I mean, obviously the fire department's not going to want you to have limbs over your, too close to your structure. That's just standard code kind of stuff. But what we talk about with this first 5 feet is stuff that's not in anyone's code right now. It probably will be in 20 years, but right now it's off the radar for these guys. It's new science. And so the more you can keep your house clean of the litter and keep the first 5 feet clean, the better off you're going to be.
So Mitch is talking about, he has the same situation.
Right.
Pine that's very tall with a
Right.
whole, with a lot of air gap. What's that, Mitch? I don't know what air gap is.
Between the roof.
Space between the roof. That's perfect. But you've got to get the needles off the roof.
Yeah.
And the roof is stone coated steel. So it's a big challenge. There's no doubt that living underneath pine needles is in oak leaves is a big challenge, but that is what you can do to harden your home to the embers. And the embers have a hard time. For instance, embers do not easily light oak trees. The leaves themselves are, they might, I'm looking outside my window right now at my oak trees. The leaves might ignite, but very fast that tree goes into pretty significantly sized branches. And those are not going to easily ignite. And the bark on an oak is very, very, very thick. And so that protects it. It takes a lot of heat to ignite an oak and even more to ultimately kill it. Usually if we get some good rains in the winter, that oak will come back. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, it's surprising how many of them actually did survive the Woolsey fire. A lot of times, I think our friend Rosie Daggett, who's a biologist, found a lot of the stuff came back.
Yep, even in our drought right now. So, you want to go on?
Yeah. So this is just some things. I think the point we're trying to make is that this is stuff that actually has some science behind it. And there have been some studies. This one was Waldo Canyon in Colorado. There's a thing called, I'm sure you know about this, Mala. It's a fire adapted community. It's a program you can join, and it's pretty cool. Actually, Beth and I are thinking about doing a little bit more in that direction in Topanga, because they're starting to get to the point where fire adapted communities can get better deals on insurance.
Actually, Ryan, it's FireWise.
Oh, it's FireWise. This is different. Yeah. Okay. All right. Sorry. My bad.
If you become a FireWise community and you're covered by Fair Plan is now giving a 10% rate reduction. And so that's something that we're really looking at.
We should work that into our next talk, by the way, Beth.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but the point being here is that they really did it. They really drilled down and they did a post-mortem on this fire, and they found that, well, what they found was pre-fire mitigation helped the fire department achieve an 82% save rate. Cost benefit ratio 1 in 257, meaning 300,000 was spent on mitigation and that saved them 77 million in losses. But it has to be done at the individual and community levels, and that's why we have wonderful people like Mala who organize things like this. So it is a community thing, you know, and it's just a fact of life. And the more you have your act together, the better you're gonna come out. There was another one that they did in Canada. This is a really scary fire up in Canada, up in, I think, Alberta, yeah. And what they found in the Fort McMurray fire was that, where am I? Yeah, the structure loss wasn't random, but was dependent on a home wildfire preparedness. So they have Fire Smart, which is another thing that is a Canadian kind of version of all this stuff. They actually have guidelines, and they can have a rate. They rate houses. I mean, they can go on GIS and just look at a house and go, okay, you know, your house is a moderate, your house is a low. The ones that had a fire hazard rating of low to moderate were well prepared, and they survived, 81% of them. So once again, it's simple stuff that people can do, and that kind of gets to the end of the thing. This was a little fire that was right behind my house in Topanga. That was just shot out my back window. It was a small little fire. We had to evacuate, and you know, it's scary. You know, you get the I mean, you guys know this, but it's all I can say is that knowing that we had already done all of this stuff beforehand, and that we'd already kind of mitigated all this stuff, it made it a lot easier to leave and kind of give us the feeling that we could come back and still have our house. It made us less nervous and weird. It's always going to be nervous and weird, but somehow mentally we were in a better place because of this stuff. So that's just another thing we want to leave you with. You know, this is also for peace of mind, some of these things. And this is kind of the end of it. Like I said, this is the website. We've got a ton of stuff there. You can see that we have links to videos we have of people who came out specifically, some of these experts like Stephen Quarles, who was in the stills that we showed you. Please know that a lot of the people who speak are not television personalities, so they are scientists. They're a little, you know, you might want to take your time in digesting these videos, but it's really good information, and it's all there for you, as well as some tips on some things products you can buy to harden your home.
So yes, Mala, USAA does give a rate reduction. They've been the leader in giving Firewise communities what rate reductions. They don't write insurance in Topanga. I don't know if they write insurance in your community. They do. That's great. So there's another reason